Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord podcast. I'm your host, Drew, with the other host, Alex, here. We both study political science at Chapman University. We're both working in public policy and politics in various fields. And we like to talk about politics and discuss politics in this podcast. And we try and have a nuanced approach and make sure that we're not, you know, going off of emotion and extremes. What we're looking at today is the rapid advancement, or what's being reported as the rapid advancement of the Taliban in Afghanistan, uh, coinciding with the United States minimizing its role and effectively pulling out all troops in the area at the same time. Um, just a little bit of context. Donald Trump originally wanted us to be out of Afghanistan by May. That was his kind of goal and deadline. Joe Biden had agreed to continue that strategy, but then moved the deadline of removal of troops in Afghanistan to September 11th of this year. However, he still plans to go along with the Trump administration's idea of moving all our military uh, forces out of Afghanistan. Um, so, Alex, now that we're in the middle of this transition and we're seeing the Taliban, they're reporting that they've taken dozens of the districts in Afghanistan, kind of how the country's broken up, and as well as some key border towns. How does this make you feel?
Well, yeah, over the last, 2 years since we've been doing this podcast, I think we've had a story once or twice a year we've talked about, and it's been completely different. I think a year ago we talked about how, the U.S. brokered a peace talks and a ceasefire with the Taliban. Then, we talked about Trump pulling out, and now here we are again. And to be honest, I'm really torn, man, because on one hand, nothing is changing. U.S. troops are dying. To what end? The Afghani government in Kabul clearly doesn't have enough authority to actually control the country. People are still dying. The Taliban has been slowly gaining momentum for the last couple of years now. So to me, it's like, what are the gains of staying there? But then on the other hand, the Taliban is growing more. They do now know that we have a deadline of when we're trying to get out, so that kind of gives them a ballpark time of how to keep moving and plan for the U.S. being gone, which is always worrying to me. We are seeing girls being massacred in schools in the more rural areas. We are seeing a more repressive approach to women's rights, gay rights, women's education, abortion, all that stuff. And, just to caveat it, Afghanistan's not a great place for human rights already. But since 2001, it has gotten better. And I'm just worried that things are going to go back. Also, some of our allies can't even get visas or asylum in the United States quickly. And to me, it's a big morale issue, mainly because the U.S. troops that have fought there, they're going to feel like their backs have been turned on.
Yeah.
Afghanis are going to feel like their backs have been turned on, and women's rights are going to go backwards. So honestly, I don't really say yay or nay here. It's too complicated. But to be honest, I actually would go with I think it's too early to pull out.
Hmm. Um, Interesting. Well, there's a lot of things going on, right? Of course, I think that um, I think it's fair to say that, we quickly ousted, like, we ousted the Taliban from hard power in 2001 relatively quickly, and we tried to have Afghanistan lead to its, like, first elections and everything. And while they were able to do so, it was hardly the democracy that we have in the United States, and not nearly as stable. And again, propped up because of a U.S. military presence. Um, so I wonder if in its, like, I do see the idea that it's a democracy that's in its infancy and it's so unstable that if the United States pulls out, it's doomed to fail. And that does seem to be the case. However, I don't think that, again, we've been propping up this democracy for 20 years now. I mean, it is 2021, right? So we're coming on 2 decades of attempting to prop up this a faux democracy or whatever, or an attempt at democracy, and it hasn't worked. So while I do fear the future, I do think that whatever we're doing currently is not working. I do think it's worth backing out. I don't think we can solve these issues with the current approach and the approach we've been doing for 2 decades. It just doesn't make sense to me. Um, that being said, we've made out like we're allies with the Afghanistan government. And I can also see how like the leaders of Afghanistan, even when the rhetoric they met with Joe Biden just recently to address this like Taliban insurge, and I can see why they're upset as well. Like they can feel like they're being, they feel like they've been U.S. allies for 20 years and they're getting their backs turned on them. I even know from some of my, anecdotal, but I have friends in the military that served in Afghanistan, and I've seen them comment and post about how, they feel like they made these allies and they worked with Afghanistan officials to fight the Taliban, and now they have to just like leave and hope that their friends are okay, right? Reports are coming out now that the Taliban are pardoning some Afghan military forces, but any of those that gave any intel to the United States or helped directly are not going to be pardoned and are subject to whatever Taliban rule prevails, which I imagine will be harsh and not exactly just. So it's very complicated. It's really hard. I feel like it's like it's we are giving up, but it's something that I think like this is our Vietnam. I think it's something that we have to, I think, swallow a really rough pill that is we can't just plant democracy where we want and whatever we're doing isn't working. And it might get darker before it gets better. But hopefully, like Vietnam, the longer term, it's something that it's a self identity that the country has to have. It's the country on its own has not had its own identity for so long, whether it's been, in Afghanistan's case, Russia and the United States, or in Vietnam's case, China, the United States, and France. They have to kick all these forces out, maybe have some, go through some turmoil on its own, and then eventually come out better. That is what happened with Vietnam. Vietnam is not a communist bloc like we thought it would become. It has embraced the modern world, and it has a growing economy. I hope that that is what happens with Afghanistan, but it has to kind of get darker before the dawn, I think. And I'm not the only person that thinks that. I think here, I forget. Oh, I had it somewhere. An Afghanistan woman. Oh, it was the one on women. It was the one that you posted on women from the Council of Foreign Relations, which I'll let you go into more detail. But the woman that was Afghanistan mentioned that, you know, she worries that it's going to get worse for her country, but that her country needs to stand on its own 2 feet, and the U.S. has not played a part in that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with that, and the one issue I take with the Vietnam comparison, not specifically to you or anything, is that I feel like Vietnam was more about political ideology, whereas in Afghanistan you have a Taliban that subscribes and follows a very extreme version of Wahhabism, which is a very old school fundamentalist sect of Islam.
Yes.
And you also have an Afghani government that isn't particularly, progressive Democrats, but they do believe in elected officials and free and fair elections. And to me, as long as the Taliban is in the country believing what they do, that is not going to happen. So that goes though to the other point is where you said that we've basically been holding up a democracy there. I agree with that. And to me, that's what actually worries me about the future, again, is because I think the only way to rule in Afghanistan is through a heavy hand. Because you have so many different sects, so many different regions. It's so rural, and there's just so much disconnect between different groups of people in the region in general, that I really feel like, unfortunately, this could push the government in Kabul to be more and more autocratic. Because like a lot of other countries in the area, like I think offhand of like Syria, Iraq, they can't run unless their government has a heavy hand. And that's what I see happening here is really not democracy or even free and fair elections, but more just control. And that's why, I don't think the U.S., whether we stay or not, is the problem in that. But it's just the fact that you can't control Afghanistan as one country. And we've seen that time and time again. And I guess at one time, maybe you could, because I think of before the Soviet invasion in the late 70s, I want to say. And basically, it was a robust, wealthy country with a lot of culture, arts, and educated people. Kabul was a really metropolitan city. But the problem is, just for those who maybe need a refresher, the CIA worked with Pakistan and the ISI to funnel money into Afghanistan. And we propped up a radical group that had a lot of ulterior motives and has then just flourished over the last like 50 years practically. And I just don't particularly know how we get rid of that cancer. And like in Vietnam per se, like again, I'm just sticking with this because I do think you're right that this is another one of our Vietnams. But to me, it's like I don't see it getting better until the idea of this fundamentalist Wahhabism that the Taliban subscribe to is over. And now like on the other thing is that like I think like on a US perspective, there's really no right or wrong. Like I feel like this just depends how political scholars and activists and elected officials how they view our role as the military and our role in the world. Because I've heard really smart people say that they don't think we should pull out yet, and I've heard really smart people say we should.
Sure.
And to me, it just kind of depends on what your presence in the region and what you think we should do. But what does scare me is that General Scott Miller, who's the general in charge of removing our troops there, he's basically worried that there's going to be a lost sense of hope and a nihilism that grows out of this amongst the people, where they basically say, well, the U.S. can't back us up. Our Kabuli government is always on the collapse or being threatened by bombs, Taliban strikes, whatever. And I just worry that the people are going to give up. And when the people give up, there's no insurrection or whatever you want to call it against the Taliban. And maybe the Taliban ends up ruling with an iron fist, because to me, the government in Kabul actually does not have a lot of legitimacy outside of that region. So it's going to be interesting. Yeah.
Well, I just figured that people have given up. Like, I mean, look, it's hard to
Fair.
an idea on the ground, right? I've never been to Afghanistan. I'm only going off of all these secondary sources and stuff. But the documentaries I've watched, it doesn't seem like the Afghani people are united against the Taliban, or the Afghani government is one. From what I've seen, the Afghani military without U.S. help seems incompetent,
Yeah.
and ill-equipped. And especially if we back out of help and training, that'll just make maybe worse. I also I like so you're I see what you're saying is like, yes, like that general, like this sense of nihilism and defeatism. I mean, I think that is going to happen. I think that is already happening currently. Even the Afghani president had to had to mention it a little, where he's like, yes, there has been some reversals in the fight. Like so when even when the top guy said there's been some reversals, what that really means is they've gotten slapped around the last few weeks by the Taliban. And so I understand that morale will be low, but like I feel like the people have been giving up. I feel like so many Afghan people have been on survival mode for decades now, where it's like, look, Taliban or Afghani or US, I'm gonna do what it takes to just make sure that I live through this bullshit.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, if I can interject for just a second, though. The one interesting thing in that Council on Foreign Relations article about what is next for Afghan women by a lady named Nakhla, I'm probably butchering that, so I
Najla, I think
apologize.
maybe. I don't know.
Najla, yeah, it just depends on how you pronounce that J, and I don't really know. But she basically is now a judge, and, she's seen kind of pre-US invasion and post-US invasion. And she does bring up time and time again that when the Northern Alliance, which was basically an anti-Taliban movement of different groups that overthrew the Taliban in 2001 with US help, she basically says that before then, you couldn't leave your house without a male escort, even
Right.
if the escort was 4 years old. When it came to dividing property, women counted, 4 women counted as 2 men. So, it just was so unfair. And Human Rights Watch during that time said 87% of Afghan women experienced at least one form of assault, sexual, psychological, whatever it may be. But she said that since like the U.S. and this Northern Alliance, made leeways into at least some form of a central government in Kabul, there are more women at school. There's greater numbers of women in leadership positions. And she herself was able to even study law and work abroad at times and still work in Afghanistan. So I agree with you. There's definitely nihilism, especially the more outside of the cities you get. I imagine it's still awful. But to me, there was progress, though it was hard to see. And obviously, it was not enough progress.
Well, I don't mean. I mean, I'm talking about what you're talking about is the nihilism now from the Taliban
Right.
surge as a result of the U.S. backing out. I don't mean there's been nihilism.
But I think nihilism and progress can kind of go hand in hand. Like if there's no progress, you're more likely to be nihilistic.
It's just how you define progress. But I mean, if
More women going to school for me is progress.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. For me, it is too. Of course, of course. I think we're getting in the weeds on nihilism here, but what
Fair.
I would say that because she also goes to say, I've lived on the Taliban for 5 years. I know what it looks like. You can't breathe. You lose your life to breathe. Everything will be gone. She's pretty nihilistic right now, saying that if the current trends continue, everything will be destroyed. But I don't know. I just like I what okay. Like what, but what do we do? Like what is our solution? Because whatever the hell we've been doing has not been working. We've been fighting the Taliban here and there. Some argue that maybe we haven't given our military the enough agency to do so. That's one argument I've heard, is that we haven't let our military, like we've
Right.
been constricting our military too much and they can't get the job done. The same argument was made in Vietnam. I don't necessarily buy that because of the civilian casualties associated with that a kind of aggression. I think just helps the Taliban. I think we've seen that. I think if you look at the rhetoric around what the Taliban uses to recruit, it's almost always about, this, evil America with its big weapons and tanks and missiles that kill your family from afar. They press a button from the other side of the world and they kill you, and that's helps them recruit. I just don't I don't see our role in this country to, like, if we continue our current route, like our current role in this country, I just don't see it changing. And while I absolutely acknowledge that there's a difference between when the Taliban had complete control and the Taliban had a third of the country control, I still just like, I don't know, man. Like this country has to get on its own 2 feet on its own, and I've heard that from Afghani people. So I just like, I have to imagine that we can't fight this fight for them.
Well, to me also, like, there's a big elephant in the room, and it's Pakistan. Like
True.
kind of talking about what we could do, at least like on a small scale, at least like try to push for some sort of progress. It would be like Imran Khan, the leader of Pakistan, did a great interview with Jonathan Swan of Axios last week that I watched, and he didn't. He also, ignored the Uyghur situation in China, which is a whole other story. He didn't believe it was happening, but he also basically said that he couldn't really condemn the Taliban. He also couldn't acknowledge if the Taliban was working out of northern and western Pakistan, which they are. There's just so much evidence that points to that, and honestly, Imran Khan, under his watch as prime minister, he has allowed the Taliban to flourish inside of rural Pakistan. And we have to remember that the Taliban actually came from Pakistan originally, not Afghanistan.
True.
And the Pakistanis have always bolstered them. And he even said that if the U.S. pulls out, he would not be willing to let American intelligence work out of Pakistan, even though they're one of our biggest subsidiaries in the region. Which to me means that, okay, if Pakistan is A, going to let the Taliban keep doing what they're doing, or at least turn a blind eye to them, and B, they're not even going to cooperate with us while we give them a lot of money, then let's pull the hell out of Pakistan. Let's make sure that they are not comfortable with their new situation with the U.S. Because clearly Imran Khan, for as fun as he was as a cricket player in his heyday, he is a dick right now. And in terms of like how he's acting with Afghanistan, and he claims that not homophobia, Islamophobia is the biggest issue facing the West and Islam. But in reality, it's some of his policies and his blind eye to what's happening in the country next to him. And so I think looking at Pakistan again, like it's not something new. Pakistan is what kept Obama and Bush and Clinton up at night. There's reports of that, and I think again Pakistan is a big problem. Also, maybe a global treaty that addresses universal rights. That was in that Council on Foreign Relations article
Yeah.
about women in Afghanistan. Maybe more pressure, but again, who cares if the Taliban are running the country? They're not going to listen to a global treaty.
I mean, to a certain point, I mean, it can only get so bad, dude.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, if the Taliban takes control, it will get really bad. But they'll mess it up. Like, I feel like, they're gonna mess up international trade. People will revolt. There will obviously be splinters. I mean, these warlords are gonna get competitive. Like, they're gonna it's like, again, it's almost like I don't know. You have to let these kids. No, that's a terrible analogy, but you have to like let people fail sometimes, so that they can succeed. And then we've been propping Afghanistan up, and millions of people involved, and hundreds of thousands of people have died as a result, and have been displaced or whatever, have their lives forever changed because of this conflict, and it has not led to there's no path to victory. So um we have to change what we're doing now. Biden, again, in his talks with the Afghani president, has said he's committed to aiding the Afghanistan, whatever that means. So, it looks like the United States is still open to non-military based aid to Afghanistan, whether that's diplomatic or financial. I don't know. They talked about that behind closed doors. Um, but at least on paper or on this speech, Biden has said he's agreed to, he's committed to viewing Afghanistan as an ally and aiding their government, just not in the same military capacity as we have before. On what you said about Pakistan is very true. You bring up an absolutely good point that all of these groups, and Taliban especially, are not like alone in their own little vacuums. They're often funded by larger Islamist states, Pakistan included, for this one. And yeah, man, dude, if that's the case, like if Imran Khan is like not down to help us out at all, or not even recognizing the Uyghur situation, like what a douche. I mean, let's not forget they were the ones that supposedly had no idea Osama bin Laden was chilling in Pakistan for years. Like, yeah,
Hmm.
right. They knew the whole freaking time. So no, they are not our friends. That's a really good point you bring up. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to mention that the United States is actually looking at ways to help Afghanistan outside of military intervention, and I just don't know what that is specifically yet. So I'm interested to see what Biden does come up with on how to maintain our alliance with the current Afghanistan government. And let's not again, while we're seeing these reports come in, like including one where I think the Taliban took out a city on the border of Turkmenistan. Um, so that like having a border capability, the ability to tax trading coming in and out and stop people from entering the border of Afghanistan is a big strategic thing. So that's a big thing for the Taliban. But that being said, is some of the reports of how quickly they're taking the country are disputed. The UN disputes some of these reports, the United States disputes some of these reports, and of course the Afghan military itself disputes many of the reports. So we don't have a full picture of what's going on. It's not like the Taliban has taken over the whole country already. That's not what's happening. But they're just taking districts at an increasing speed that is worrisome to the global community. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's going to be something we're going to have to see for sure. But part of me almost feels like neighboring countries, especially places like Pakistan and Turkmenistan, may be okay with what the Taliban are doing because they're sometimes being more anti-imperialism and anti-American power
Sure.
is more important than being anti-Taliban. And I think that's what we're seeing in some parts. I also, on the domestic side, I do. It's going to be interesting. Like Gallup had a pull out just yesterday, I think it was, that I saw that 40% of Americans believe that the military effort is a mistake in general, but that leaves 60%, which are kind of in different vagaries around it. So I'm actually kind of curious to see how this could either help Biden or backfire, depending how it works. Like obviously Trump kind of planted the seed of pulling out,
Yeah.
but obviously Biden is going to be under his watch, and I'm curious, like if this ends well, will it help Biden or will it hurt him? So yeah.
Definitely. And shout out to this article that you found and we both read. This Council for Relation one, definitely worth a read for those out there, from Najla Ayubi. Uh, Her story is incredible and pretty fascinating. So super fast. And again, this also quickly reminded me just a little bit about we talked a little bit about critical race theory as just a lens in which to view an issue. This and again, and how we have to use multiple lenses, right? And different lenses offer different angles and perspectives that can be valuable in one way or another. This is a great one. Like this is almost viewing the conflict in Afghanistan through a feminist lens. What does this mean
Right.
for women, right? This is and it's not the only lens we want to view this issue in. We obviously want to view Afghanistan through a geopolitical lens that leads us to the conflicts with Russia and the United States and Pakistan's geopolitical conflicts, right? So that's one lens. This is a great feminist lens to look at this issue. Talks about women's rights and how Afghanistan is ranked as the second worst place to live to be a woman in, next to Yemen. So anyway, another just quick reminder that um, it's important to have these lenses, and they offer different angles, and it doesn't mean it's the only way to look at something, but they offer value, and this is a great one. So shout out to that.